Welcome to San Francisco State School of Cinema and Women of Color in Hollywood. I'd like to thank our co-sponsors, the Division of Equity and Community Inclusion, as well as the Institute for Civic and Community Engagement and the Marcus Funds for Excellence in the School of Cinema. There are people who deserve a special shout out for making this event happen. Dr. Frederick Smith, Luis de Paz Fernandez, Bucket Mayweather, Tarshel Beards, Christian Lozano Quelar, Dr. Arlene Daus Magbual, Leva Lassi Lowy-On, Brianna M. Williams, and especially Artie Farkas, who is the technical wizard behind the scenes making this event happen. I'm Celine Pereña Shimizu, director of the School of Cinema. Today's a very special event. I feel so fortunate to be alive at the very same time as our guests, especially Nicole Jefferson Asher, with whom I grew up and came up at UC Berkeley. We're both from the East Coast, came to California, went to UCLA Film School together. And I still remember the very night before UCLA Film School started, she was sleeping over at my house, and we just had so much nervous energy and excitement about what it meant for us as women of color to be going to a major film school, thinking about what was ahead, and to see her today and everything she's accomplished is just, just beyond inspiring in terms of thinking what can be possible in a life. And I'm also so pleased to welcome Rain Valdez, who I'm meeting for the first time together, but who already feels like, part of my identity as a diasporic Filipinx person. She really represents so much of what can be done, even if you feel alone in this industry as women of color. So I'll begin by introducing the folks who will be on stage today. Kevin Kodama will be the moderator. If you can come up, Kevin. Kevin is the grant coordinator for SFSU's Feminist Filmmakers Fellowship. He's in his fourth year, a cinema major with a focus in writing and directing feature films that challenge and confront the dominant ideology. We're working together on his senior project, and like Rain, comes from both Filipinx and Guamanian backgrounds. Next, DJ Chan, who is a first-year MFA student in the School of Cinema. He is the event organizer for the School of Cinema. He's an aspiring writer-director whose goal is to make films centered on queer Asian American experience. A favorite collaborator of the School of Cinema is Tarshel Beards. Tarshel is an educator and communications and marketing strategist, and currently serves as the director of the Black Unity Center at SF State. The Black Unity Center is the home away from home for Black students, and through cross-campus community collaborations and an intersectional African-centered environment, provides students with transformative, impactful, and socially conscious programs that allow them to grow academically, interpersonally, culturally, and professionally. And it's one of the spaces that I miss most on the SF State campus. Now it's my honor to introduce our distinguished guests. Rain Valdez just made history as the first Filipinx American transgender woman to be nominated for a Primetime Emmy in an acting category for her lead role in Razor Tongue, which she created and produced. Rain is the founder of Act Now, the only acting class in Los Angeles prioritizing a safe space for LGBTQIA actors. Rain has been named one of Outfest LA's next generation of filmmakers and is Inside Out Pitch Please Contest 2019 winner. She recently starred in Amazon's Sneaky Pete opposite Margot Martindale and can be seen in CBS All Access show Why Women Kill. Welcome, Rain. Nicole Jefferson Asher has earned numerous credits writing for film and television, having created projects for Fox, Warner Brothers, HBO, Lifetime, VH1, and Millar Goff Inc. Recent credits include Love Beats Rhymes for Lionsgate and Self-Made, inspired by the life of Madame C.J. Walker for Netflix, starring Octavia Spencer in the title role. Currently, she serves as co-executive producer on P-Valley, the hit series on Stars, created by award-winning playwright Katori Hall. Welcome, Nicole. Thank you so much. Enjoy.
Thank you, Celine. Thank you for that wonderful intro.
Hi, Rain and Nicole. We're so happy to have you both here, and I've been super excited to have this conversation. So in the spirit of today's event, I'd like to begin this conversation by asking the two of you to reflect on the meaning of agency. In cultural anthropology, scholar Saba Mahmood defines agency as the ability to act within constraints. So, what does agency mean for you and for your work?
Well, that is a very complicated question. I think when you're talking about the film industry, the entertainment industry, you know, which is primarily set up so that no one has agency, right? That the control is in, you know, the hands of the studio heads or whatever. You know, it's very much based off of a very, you know, hierarchical you know, almost kind of plantation like, you know, scenario, you know, paradigm where, you know, a lot of times the people who work the hardest get paid the least, like, you know, just all of those, you know, all of the typical, you know, kind of dynamics in capitalism, I feel like are really written large in you know in the film industry and how you know things are produced. So I, you know, it's difficult. I think it's difficult. I think it's lonely. I think, but it also is important work. It's you. I think you have to look at it at multiple different levels, you know, and it really kind of depends on how you what you want out of it, what you feel like your purpose is. Are you here to be a creator? Are you here to represent in some other way? And I think that, you know, from there, when you make that decision, when you make that decision about what, you know, what you're willing to do, what you want to do, then you have to really make the decision of what you're willing to do. You know, it's kind of like the Dave Chappelle question. I think it's really important that everybody ask themselves, you know, what is the line that $50 million wouldn't make me cross, you know, in terms of what I'm being asked to do. Um, you know, so when I think about agency, I think about, you know, what is the thing that, especially if I feel compromised or whatever, it's really just always being clear about what that line is. I wanted to always tell stories that were female focused, that were people of color focused. I joined this industry because I felt like there was a whole history of cinema that excluded us, that we were invisible, that we were at best maids and butlers, and I wanted to fill that in. I wanted to create some representations. So for me, agency has been, you know, staying focused on that goal, and you know, within that, negotiating those lines and being clear, you know, what $50 million would or wouldn't, you know, make me do.
Yeah, I completely agree with Nicole. It's very hard to have any semblance of agency in this industry that we are in. I think for me, it got to a similar point of, um, you know, if I'm gonna do this, you know, like what am I willing to do, and what can I do um, in order to get to where I want to be as a actor, creator, and writer. And a lot of the things that I have done, because I started out in this industry just as an actor, the writing and the filmmaking and the producing, I had to learn all of that almost as a necessity just to get myself on screen because no one else was trying to put me on screen. And so for me it was, well, if I want to act, how can I do that and make it happen for myself? And it meant that I needed to learn how to write a script and produce it and crowdfund it. And so I think it took a little bit of dismantling some of the ideas that were conditioned to believe, as an Asian American trans woman, I'm sort of treated as the bottom of the barrel and sort of the last person in line to be considered for anything. And, did I believe that for a very long time? Yes. Do I have to believe that? No. And it just got to a point where I was tired of the same stereotypical stories of my communities that I represent. And, I was thinking a lot about that quote, agency being action within constraints. I think when I started dismantling the idea that I need to be, that I, that the world needs to love me, my industry needs to love me and needs to want me. Once I started dismantling the idea of the external things that I wanted, I started just creating all of those for myself, the love that I needed. I started realizing that there was so much here. And I also started realizing that the constraints were just illusions that somebody came up with. And so understanding that, as a person of color and trans and queer identifying person, I am out of this world. I am otherworldly. And once I started to sort of grasp the idea that, well, I'm for some reason, for purposes beyond my control, I'm in this world. And I had to understand the limitations that surrounds me. But once I started understanding that the constraints and the limitations were just illusions that somebody came up with, I started to realize they were actually just rules that were meant to be broken. And some rules are there to protect you, like driving, right? But then some rules, you know, especially if you're out of this world, and everyone on this panel that I'm looking at right now, we've all felt a sense of not belonging here. And once I started to realize that, okay, that's a thing, but now how do I work around that? And how do I start having agency within these constraints, within these illusions? And suddenly, slowly but surely, the illusions just started, I kind of just started taking them down one by one and little by little. And things that have happened to me, people, uh, it's like, well, that was out of left field, so people like with the Emmy nomination, for example, no one saw that coming, neither did myself. But I think it had a lot to do with the fact that I did have agency in wanting to tell my story and wanting to be on screen and wanting to not compromise about the story that I wanted to tell and the kind of representation I wanted to show about a woman who is Asian American, who is trans, but she has this voice that defies any stereotypical representation of Asian Americans. She has a strong voice and she speaks up for herself. She stands up for herself, and she's messy, and she's, and she gets to fall in love or whatever, right? And she gets to be messy. And so for me, having agency is the ability to be a little uncompromising with yourself, and just no matter what's stacked up against you, there's always a way around it.
Thank you both for sharing.
Yes, we're out of this world. That's my quote of the week. Put that in everything. So Nicole, you write about what Madam C.J. Walker went through to become the first self-made Black female millionaire. And Rain, you write about the character Belle, who has a razor tongue, or the capacity to say exactly what she is thinking. How do the ideas of being self-made or having a razor tongue relate to having agency?
You wanted to go first, Rain?
You can go. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, the amazing thing about Madam C.J. Walker was that she was born 2 years after the Civil War. She was that first generation out of in Reconstruction, where this was like the first generation of Black Americans that even had any concept, had to really struggle or wrestle with the idea of what does it mean to be American. Up until then, they were 3/5 of a person, or property, or what have you. And so, so I think that, I mean, there's no that I can't think of any way to be more self-made than that, to like really, to have to completely invent not just her business persona or her public persona, but even her identity and status as an American, and any sort of kinship to this country. So, I guess in terms of how that inspired me, that really just inspired me to keep going. It's like any little bullshit that was happening with me, I'll remember, like, well, Madam C.J. Walker had it, you know what I mean? Like I can't be complaining about being tired, or, oh, I'm hungry, or I don't feel like working today, because, that's just not an option. And I'm lucky to have, such problems. So, and it also just really helped me see that, like, you know, just what vision is, really, and that's what I really tried to capture in the show, especially with the surreal moments, and that this was a person that had a vision, and it wasn't based off of something that she had seen before. It completely was organic, and all that you need to do to fulfill that vision. So I think that's also agency in another way, in again, in just deciding what you want, pursuing that, and regardless of the sacrifices, regardless of the costs. And so her story will always inspire me, and as just even as a woman, just as a human being, in terms of just resilience, and and holding on to a vision, and not stopping until you achieve it. If she can achieve it, then I could at least get something, a TV show made.
I think for me, Belle represents the discontentment in a lot of women. Um, and for me, particularly, as within the complications of my identity, being trans and being Asian American, um, I immediately find myself shrinking in certain rooms, or being quiet and not, you know, allowing my light to shine. And um, Belle, for me, like, represents the idea that you can have a voice and that you can stand up for yourself, you can speak up for yourself within the moment, and not have to wait until you get in the car and you're driving away and you're like, oh, I should have said that. Because that happens to me all the time, and it must mean that it's happening to other women, and other trans women and queer folks. So I wanted to create a character that will inspire agency and sovereignty in oneself. And I also wanted to create a character that is vastly different from what we've seen with AAPI women, and trans women, really queer people. Um, and so for me, uh, the show breaks so many barriers in that regard, because even with before we got into production, there was a lot of pushback about the script and about when my character Belle discloses her transness, and a lot of some of the feedback that we were getting is, well, she should say that she's trans in the first episode. And I'm like, no, she doesn't have to, and I'm not going to until the last episode. And so, I think there's so many perceptions and ideas of who trans people are, and it's become the most interesting thing about us to talk about, when in actuality it really, really isn't. And so Belle represents that agency where she can move around the world in her own human experiences throughout, whether she's on a blind date or whether she's on a job interview, and have the agency to just be her own person and express how she feels in that moment, and express her intellect and her thought, and continue to just bulldoze capitalism and patriarchy. And I hope that when other people watch the show, that they're inspired to find agency within themselves to start speaking up. And I did it because I needed it. When I wrote the show, when I wrote Belle, I found myself being very angry that I let certain things happen to me, that I didn't have the agency to speak up for myself. I didn't value myself enough to know that wasn't right, or so-and-so shouldn't have said that to me. And so for me, it was, when I created the show, it allowed me to sort of experience the death of my old self and birth a new version of me that now knows that I don't have to shrink, and I don't have to quiet myself and compromise myself in order to justify someone's discomfort.
Absolutely.
Yes, that was so great. So Rain, you already talked about what the writing process is like for you, and like the inspiration to write these characters. And both of you have already talked about how like Madam C.J. Walker from Selfmade and Belle from Razor Tongue are both powerful figures. So I'm wondering, what inspires you or drives you to write characters, across all of your projects, who use their voices to get what they want, or to claim spaces in places that have traditionally marginalized women, LGBTQ people, and people of color? And how do you connect this with your own definition of personal power?
That's a loaded question.
I think, to me, it's because America needs to see it. If that's not clear from these last 4 years that we've experienced, and history in general. But I think that as many stereotypes as there are about the angry Black woman, and or whatever, they're still at a really fundamental core issue and level. People still are either not comfortable with or haven't seen enough of women in with a lot of agency, I guess, and to really kind of break it down. And I think especially at that time, I think that there also is this misconception. I mean, I don't know what most people really think, was happening in the 1910s, but speaking out wasn't invented in the 60s. It wasn't invented with social media. It was, it's not something that's new to our generations. It is something that's always been a necessity. So, to me, again, I mean, I'm very interested in history. I'm very interested in how history is informing us and shaping us. And I think that a lot of the problems that we, as a culture and really as a world are experiencing now is a lack of understanding of history, or a refusal to contextualize history or reckon with history. So to me, it's really important to just keep reiterating those images, and to keep that alive. Unfortunately, Madam J. Walker isn't not taught in schools the way that Henry Ford is. And unfortunately, people don't read as much as they used to, and don't, so a lot of people do look to get their information from cinema, from TV, and the prime, one of the biggest, compliments that I got was, how many people just, didn't know anything about her, and how much they learned from watching the show.
Yeah, all of that. I completely agree. They need to see it. I think film and TV is so influential that it shapes culture and society and can create empathy. But what we have seen historically, um, romantic comedies are propaganda for who gets to be loved, and action movies are propaganda for who gets to win. And in the history of TV and film, decades and decades, what we've seen mostly is prioritizing white people, or cisgender people, heteronormative people, um, and beautiful and moneyed, who gets to be loved and they get to win. And so if a marginalized queer person of color, aren't being afforded those narratives, how do they understand where they fit into this world? And how do people who are surrounded or see a person of color or see an Asian American, how do they treat that person based on what TV and film has been conditioning them to believe us to be who we are? And we all deserve love, and we all deserve to win. But going back to what Nicole was saying, is we haven't seen quite enough of it, and it's about time, especially with what's happening in the world right now, with all the violence being targeted, all the violence that are happening to our Asian American community, and with Black Lives Matter. There is a shift, there is a revolution, there is an uprising, and Hollywood needs to start catching up. And I think it's a little backed up at this point because of COVID, but my hopes is that they're listening to the world, and they're watching what's happening in the news, and incorporating these into stories, and showing us in our most human experience, which is very nuanced, and it's very complicated, and full of love and full of joy. And we belong here. We always have. And, it needs to be done, and we need to show it. And for me, my work has always been within that purpose. It's always been passion meets necessity, because I love what I love doing what I do, but there's also a need for it. We need to see it, not just for myself, but for my communities.
Yes, we do. I have a follow-up question for you, Nicole. Can you discuss the creative process when writing about a historical figure in Black history? How do you take the historical facts and add a creative flair for storytelling? And the second part of the question is kind of, how do you deal with social media criticism and cancel culture? Because it's pretty swift. And how do you deal with that? Uh-oh, we can't hear you.
To answer the second part, well, here, I'll answer the first part. So, it's interesting writing a biopic, and I've actually written several. They just, for many of them, haven't seen the light of day. Mostly because of estates, rights, copyrights, you know, those types of issues. That has happened far more than actually any type of gatekeepers, you know, within Hollywood. And you know, it's a fraught experience. It's, you know, I understand, especially from, if as somebody who is you know, is the subject of a biopic, or the family member, or the estate, you know, I understand that it's very hard to actually watch your what, you know, somebody else interpreting your life. What, you know, it's hard to watch that. It's, you know, it probably, you know, definitely messes with your own construction of your own sense of self. And it can be an emotional and painful experience. So it is complicated. It's a tough thing. It's a different type of writing than just writing a character that you can just kind of follow their whims or their desires, because, you know, at the end of the day, for people who actually existed, certain things happened in certain places that don't necessarily match up to, you know, film grammar or the craft of storytelling. So you know, I think the first part of that, the answer is that I have to be very choosy in who I pick, even to feature, whether or not their lives do match up with kind of the what, like our a narrative flow that we are used to, that events happened, that there's an arc to their life, that there's a lesson to their life. You know, not everybody has that. Some people have done great things, that, you know, they're amazing people, they're famous, you know, but that they don't, their lives don't necessarily arc in a way that necessitates itself to, you know, to a film or a TV, you know, or a longer format. So first it's just that. Then, you know, particularly with Madam CJ Walker, you know, what was interesting to me is that, you know, it died over 100 years ago. There's no one on earth who knows exactly what she said, did, and thought. You know, people there, certainly we could guess, certainly we could, you know, but at a core level, anything that I have her saying is really coming from me, is really coming from, you know, my own, you know, either take on it, or, and you know, so it's a different process than doing, you know, something about Madonna, or, you know, somebody who's living, that there's a huge amount of actual like footage and interviews, and, you know, it's Madam CJ Walker is kind of in between, you know, in between a fictional character and a you know, a real person, in the sense that, you know, you do have to make up a lot of what we would think that she said and did, because, you know, even, you know, there's a book, you know, there's a few things about her, but they're really not as exhaustive as, you know, as necessary. So, you know, that's one of the reasons also too, that, and the idea that I really wanted to hit home the idea that she was a visionary, and the best way to do that is to show her vision. So the fantastical aspects of that really are about, you know, saying that in a formal way, not just, you know, with speeches and continuing to reiterate, oh, she's so great, she's so, you know, it's to really understand that, no, she looks at something and she sees the world differently than most people. So, you know, within that, you know, I absolutely expected that, you know, and knew, again, because I've been down this road before, that not everybody is going to be happy with that choice. You know, certainly I understand that you know, that there is a dearth of information about her. There is a dearth of opportunities to tell stories like this. But at the end of the day, you know, everybody's going to have their own different take, and, you know, I can only do what, you know, is in my heart and mind and soul. I can't really listen to, you know, what criticism that I think, you know, while there were some points, there also is stuff that is very kind of self-centered, and then also not understanding the process, you know, that, you know, I think that some of the criticism that I faced was very agenda based, was very, and not really understanding the, all that goes into actually getting her story to screen. So, for the most part, I like I said, in terms of the second part of the question about, how do I deal with social media? I didn't really engage. I mean, honestly, I'm not a huge social media fan. As once you go to my Instagram, you'll see that I haven't updated it in forever. I think social media is a great tool in some instances, and I think that it's the devil in certain other instances. And so it's not something that I actually just on a day to, I'm busy. I was really too busy to really overly engage. That said, I am, remotely aware of, of what, of detractors or people who wanted more of a documentary style. I will say that there were some criticisms. A lot of criticisms weren't true, and especially in terms of the things that were claimed that I was fictionalized. I think there was a lot of homophobia because it was a fact that her daughter did have relationships with women. There were and so the fact that was really interesting that people were so quick, twisted themselves into pretzels to try to, well, it was just a relationship later down the line. Like, I mean, yeah, it was a relationship. You know what I mean? Like, so that's what I'm saying. It's like there was so many ugly agendas that, at a certain point you have to just kind of tune it out and keep doing your work. My mother always, one of the best things my mother ever taught me is no matter what you do, somebody's going to have something to say about it. And so, so I expected somebody to have something to say about it. I'm sure, people are going to continue to have something to say about, what I continue to do. And, you just twirl on the haters.
I love it. It's all in the haters. Thank you. Thank you. I really wanted to ask you that question because I saw a lot of the agenda stuff floating around. Like, wait, we got this movie about this Black woman. It's phenomenal. What are you guys talking about? And a lot of it came from so-called historians, I'll say. Yeah, but you're right, agenda based. Thank you.
And Rain, I have a question for you. When I was watching the Netflix documentary Disclosure, something that really struck me was when you said you were the trans Asian American representation in Hollywood. And when I heard that, I was thinking, like in my own learning of like queer history, I rarely see Asian American faces. And so I was wondering, has the entertainment industry changed to be more inclusive of trans Asian American creators and performers since your interview for Disclosure?
Absolutely, it's changed immensely. It's also, when I shot that interview, it was maybe 2017, 2016. It was very, very early on. I knew very, very few, if not zero, Asian American trans actors or creators. They just weren't in my life at that time. And after that interview, of course, now I know more. Leo Sheng, who's on the L Word, and Cassandra James, and there's so much more of us. And so I do think it's changed, and it's shifting to be more just aware of who we are and our talent. But I also think that it had a lot to do with what I was talking about earlier, the shrinking and the quieting. I think particularly with our Asian American community, I think we're just taught to believe that we're the model minority, and we're the well behaved, which I don't think that's true. I think that model minority is a myth, and but I think it sort of allowed us to sort of like fly under the radar when it comes to this world and in the spaces that we work in. And so Disclosure was just this opportunity where I got to talk about that experience, because growing up, you know, I loved romantic comedies. I loved comedies in general, and I loved action movies. And, you know, I always found myself being sort of like attracted to, you know, Julia Roberts or Sandra Bullock, like attracted to the work, because I'm like, ooh, I can do that. I'm, you know, I'm funny and you know, like I know I'm a good actor, like, but they weren't casting Asian Americans, let alone trans people, in those roles. And so it got harder the more I moved around in Hollywood and realized that, oh, that's probably never going to happen. Like, oh my God, you know? Um, and the more I looked and the more I searched, the more I realized there just wasn't any. And so, and the few, you know, trans people who were sort of in the business and worked very quietly with zero to little disclosure. And when they were found out, they were obliterated by the media. And so for me, there was this fear of that happening to me and being ostracized completely from the industry. So, you know, I chose to keep quiet with my trans identity for quite some time, because I found it very difficult to move around in it just as an Asian American woman. And I didn't want to have to add another label to that. And the Asian American representation that I did see is when it comes to trans people, were very few and completely inaccurate. And you know, I started to realize, particularly with Madame Butterfly, the one that I talk about in Disclosure, people would come up to me and be like, oh, you know, like, have you seen it? Did you see that? And I started to realize, when I finally did see it, I started to realize, oh my God, is that what people think I am? You know, and it makes you think that they clearly have no clue about who I am and my experience in this world. And you know, I think, which is why it's really important that I continue to create and write, so we can have more of these stories. And I'm so glad that I'm finding more people within my community, like, you know, Diane Paragas, which Celine mentioned, and, you know, Isabel Sandoval, who I didn't know as well at the time when I shot Disclosure. And so there's more of us now here, just kind of creating our own content and creating space for ourselves in an industry that, you know, continually to perpetuates the idea that we don't belong. And so for us, it's really hard. It's really tough, you know, to be seen and to be valued. And it's something that I struggle with every day. And but like I said earlier, it's learning to sort of dismantle the illusions that we're taught, and finding ways to like see through them and eventually like take them down.
Thank you.
I'm going to switch a little bit and talk about the teams that you work with. I know on Self-Made, Nicole, you had only Black female voices, and in Raise Your Tongue, you had 80% trans, queer female in front and behind the camera. So how has it, or how difficult, or was it not difficult to have diverse teams for your projects, and how important is it? We've talked a lot about representation, the team behind the camera.
It's very important. I mean, I guess the funniest thing that I can kind of relate it to was there was one day where we had to do inserts on like hair straightening, and we had a very diverse crew, but our ADs were men, and but brown men even, but men, and also we shot in Canada, so there was also even a whole other level of that. And so like they just like the wonderment when they saw like kinky hair being straightened and and it did really require a lot of like, okay, we need outlets to be able to plug them in because it has to be hot, because it can't get straightened unless it's hot. So you realize it's like little things like that, like we had to wait. We lost like 2 hours of the day because there was no electricity to be able to actually plug the hot comb in, because they didn't realize that. So that's, kind of like a small and like funny example of it. But it does, it does really remind you why it is important to have a diverse crew, to have people who understand the culture, who have people understand what you're talking about, or have a frame of reference to what you're doing. It was very important to me, and honestly, to their credit, it was very important to Netflix too, to have female directors, to have female keys. All of the keys, the key crew heads were women, except for one department, makeup, and which is another switch in itself. And it wasn't hard. It wasn't hard. It wasn't super easy, in the sense that, one of the things, usually when you're casting, when you're crewing, agencies send you all of their people, and the reality is that usually the first people that they send you are going to be white men. Those are the people who have the most experience. Those are the people who, those are the people that are top of mind, even at the agencies. And so, really what it entailed was, we're really looking for, to diversify the, so you have to go back to the agencies and tell them, no, who else do you have? Do you have a more diverse candidate? Do you have, and it wasn't looking for any one specific, but it was important because, what I realized about women, about the women of color that came to our shoot, was they were more passionate about it. They just were. It wasn't just a job for them. And we're in the way that, and that's not to say there was a lot of lovely white men that worked in our crew who were very passionate, who worked very hard, who understood and really wanted to be there. But that to me is the primary thing, is that you have to be passionate about what you're doing. And that was the main mandate. And I did find that, some of the most passionate were other women, and who understood the material better did happen to be women. And that was absolutely more important to me than somebody who might have had a longer resume.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. It was very similar with Razor Tongue. We wanted to employ as many queer, trans, non-binary people in front of the camera and behind the camera, because we wanted people involved that understood the material and understood Belle and this journey that she's on. Also, it wasn't very difficult for me to find those people, because we were very vocal about it. And so we just searched and we found them, and because we were vocal about it, they were able to find us. And for me as a creator, I always just I want to move mountains with the people that I love, and I want to build community with the people that I want to champion. And so in that regard, it was such a special set, because particularly I, was the lead star of it, and I was show running it, and um, so I had the toughest job of all because I was on set every day, um, and I wanted to make sure that there were people in every department that I trusted and that were just as passionate about what we were doing, as well as just as understanding about what it is that we were doing for this. And I also wanted to show Hollywood a different kind of narrative when it comes to an Asian American trans woman. Like we don't, you know our gender identity does not have to be the main plot line, and I wanted to show that in a way that that they get it and that they understand this character. I also wanted to show that uh, other talented trans actors can play roles that aren't gender specific. Sean Dasani, who plays the colonizer in episode 1, he's a trans identifying person, but you would not necessarily know that in that episode. As well as with Alexander Gray's character Ariel, it's something that just isn't brought up or talked about. And that's another thing that I think is uh, this perception and this notion that I want to dismantle in this industry, this idea that those are the only roles that we can play and the only plot line that's worth having in a story. And, you know, with Razor Tongue, it was very, very clear that this show was going to be about dismantling those ideas and those notions, and having the right people in place, so that I didn't have to explain myself, because it becomes a lot of work when, like Nicole was saying, like if the cis white people who are always top of mind are the ones who come in and they're like, well, what if, and they're calling the shots in the department, it becomes a lot of work for me and the queer and trans people around if we're having to explain, why certain things has to be this way, why she doesn't say she's trans in the first episode, and why the character of Ariel isn't specifically like, it just made it just so much more easier and a cohesive process, and it allowed all of us to just focus on the job, and not be consulting producers to one another. It just allowed us to be, an actor or a producer or an art director, and do it with passion and efficiency and creativity. And for me, that was the best part about Razor Tongue, is that experience and remembering how utopian and unique it was. And when I rewatched the show, which I haven't in a while, but I remember last year when I was in the theater rewatching it, my favorite part was the end credits. Because like, oh yeah, like that person was in that, and like, oh, I remember when they were creating the production design, and because you don't see that in the show, you don't see the behind the scenes aspect of it, and so for me, the end credits is so special because I get to see all the names of the people that made that show so special of an experience, for not just for me but for everybody that was involved. And we did have cis people working on set, which is why we say 80%, because our first AD was a cisgender African American male. And what I love about including cis people in our work is that they're introduced to queer and trans people in a very different light, in a way where there's common ground, and in a way where they see that there's talent, and in a way where they go to the next set and notice the difference when there aren't any trans and queer people or POC people, at the next job that that they go on to next. And my first AD made me realize that when he texted me and said, "Wow, I'm doing this, and there's no queer trans people on this set. It's amazing," and it made him feel, you know. It made Razor Time very memorable to him, and it made him want to advocate for more of us in his own sets, which I thought was amazing.
Thank you so much, Rain and Nicole, for this wonderful discussion. I'm going to call back our moderator, Kevin Kodama, for a quick Q&A.
Hello. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for your time today. First question I want to start off with is kind of about creating agency through career building. Kazuko asks, Nicole specifically, how did you start your career as a TV writer? And then for both of you, how do you suggest we start TV or starting careers in TV writing during the pandemic?
Well, the short answer is I didn't start as a TV writer. I started as I actually started as a feature director. When me and Celine were going to film school, I was in the directing program, and it kind of similar to Rain's experience of, realizing like, oh, there's not going to be a whole bunch of scripts just out there just waiting for me to direct. I better learn to write. And I started to really I started to really find that I really liked creating worlds, and so much of what I had kind of gravitated towards in directing, I felt like I was getting in writing. And so I was definitely on a feature route. I was, I'm going to be an indie filmmaker, and really kind of TV kind of enfolded me, as the opportunities for feature filmmaking have really lessened. And there were a lot more, they just, year by year, it just got to be more and more job offers to do films. It started off, I did several Lifetime films, and just kind of transitioned into, I had a very crazy start, and but I definitely did not work my way up into the writer's room in the traditional way that most people see. That said, I think that what's great about today is that that is becoming more and more common. I know a lot of people who have a similar kind of experience to mine, who sold something on a pitch, or had the opportunity to create a show, and that is kind of their way in. I also will say that the pandemic, since I've been in 2 writers' rooms during the pandemic, last year I was probably busier than ever, because really the only people who were working in Hollywood at a certain time were writers, because that was really the only people who could keep working. So I never got to bake banana bread and and catch up on my Netflix, because I was juggling and getting and people were constantly looking for writers for things. So the room that I'm in now for P Valley, one of the amazing things is, thanks to Zoom, we do it through Zoom, and thanks to the pandemic, we are able to have we have a writer that is in Ireland. We have writers in New York, Atlanta, LA, Memphis. Somebody was in Uganda for a minute. So we have a writer's room that we wouldn't have been able to have if it had only been just in LA. I probably wouldn't have been able to, because she primarily did the writer's room in New York. I wouldn't have been able to join season 2 if it had just been in New York. So, there are definitely downsides to Zoom writers' rooms. I'm not gonna cape for it, because it's very draining. It's very hard to interact. It's hard to break story in the way that you would if you were in person. But it does, I think that there's no better time to break in is now There are, there's never been as many networks and streaming services that are in desperate need of content. There's never been as much awareness and that we do need a new way to tell stories and new stories to tell. And technology has allowed it that you don't necessarily have to just be in New York or LA anymore in order to be in a writer's room. So, I think that if you even kind of want to do it, get your samples together, and just start sending them to festivals, send them to film, to any type of, awards, send them to as many people, get whoever, a friend of a friend to read them that may be in the business, just, really get your work out there and, get in the game. Because I do think that the industry is going to contract fairly soon. But now I think, again, there really is no better time.
So I was baking banana bread and catching up on Netflix for sure. But to answer your question in terms of writing, yeah, I mean, I echo with everything that Nicole is saying is, write, get that sample in. And if you're looking for resources, one that really helped me in terms of a TV pilot is the TV Writer's Workbook by Ellen Sandler. So that's a resource that can help you sort of shape what that would look like for you in terms of TV. But I like to.
Also read pilots. There's lots of pilots floating around online. Reading, the pilots to your favorite shows is very helpful.
I completely agree with that. I like to read pilots myself. And, for me, I also like to write from my own experience. I like to create characters that are different from what I've seen on TV. And, take agency in telling your own story. It might be a little daunting to think about writing and shooting a short film, but that's how pretty much I started. That's what catapulted. Well, it's not how I started, but it's what took me to the next level, I guess I should say. Is I wrote a short film. It was 14 minutes, had a beginning, middle, and an end, and I got it into a film festival, and it opened doors. And so, my advice is to just write, make a short film, and use his downtime to get your friends together and shoot in a safe way, obviously, because we're in a pandemic. But
Awesome. Thank you both for that. To kind of wrap up the event here, in like a brief sentence or two, Flora asks, is it always important to foreground your background / identity when making creative work? And in what ways do you think this is potentially limiting or on the contrary, a source of creativity?
Well, I'll just say that to me, I think that to me, one of the things that I was always taught was that it's really important to be actually as specific as possible, to be clear about your voice, about who you are, what you represent, and what you bring to the table, even just beyond, as an identity, just even, I'm a drama writer, I'm a feature writer. I think it's, I think people have a tendency to want to be a jack of all trades or to not want to get pigeonholed. But the reality is that, people are only going to come to you because they know you bring a certain thing, that you have a certain voice, that you tell it, that you do a certain thing. So you should, again, decide what that is, decide what you're comfortable with, and, a lot in terms of your identity and and just every other aspect of your life, and really be about that, really be the best that you can be, because that's what's going to propel you. you know, hiding who you are, you know, lies are very difficult, you know, to sustain, and especially as a writer, especially as a creative person, especially as an artist, you know, truth is our commodity. And so there's no reason to hide who you are. Will you might, yes, you might miss out on some jobs or some opportunities, but so many more are going to open up.
Yeah, I used to think certain parts of my identity were my limitations. I like truly, really believed it, and it was really a sad time in my life when I think about it. But now those identities, those truths, um, my authenticity has become my strengths, and it's become what makes me unique and what makes me different. And when you take the things that are authentic to you, to who you are, and you match it with the genre that you love or the format that you love, you know, like for me was, you know, my uniqueness and my authenticity with romantic comedies. That's what it was, and that set me apart from what everybody else was doing. And so when you find that thing that makes you unique and makes you excited and makes you stand out, not only does it open doors for you, but it reignites your passion and reintroduces you to the excitement of doing what you love to do. And it almost makes it a little easier, given that we're so, you know, stacked up against so many you know, constraints, right? If you're excited about what you do and if you're passionate about it, it almost doesn't matter what's stacked up against you, because you'll find a way to move around it because you're excited about this story and this authenticity that you have to offer.
Well, thank you again for speaking, and yeah, just wanted to welcome back Director of School Cinema, Celine Chimizi.
I'd like to give a really special thanks to Tarshel and DJ for this conversation and the beautiful questions. Kevin for such a lively moderation, Artie behind the scenes, and just lots of love to you, Rain, and lots of love to you, Nicole. You're so generous to us and the future generations. We really appreciate you. Thank you for being here with us. Artie, could you save the chat, please? I'm going to send it to Nicole and Rain so they can bask in their genius today.
Okay, I'm also going to take a picture right now.
Oh, yes,
so
thank you.
3, 2, 1. Beautiful.
As a reminder, folks, we recorded this, but it's going to be private access to our students who are not able to make it today because of the constraints of the pandemic. So just be assured that it's not going to circulate, but it's so that our students don't miss it. For everyone here, thank you for letting your peers know what an amazing conversation this was today. I learned so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. This is great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're so great. Thank you.
Yeah, we have to have you back. We didn't get through all the questions. So much more to talk about.
Anytime. Anytime.
I really appreciate being with you today.
We'll bring you back to the Bay Area, Nicole. We'll bring you Rain, and we're going to eat well together. So
I would love that.
I would love that. Yeah, that sounds amazing.
Let's do it.
okay, yeah. Sorry.